Philippe, what's the difference for a woman in comedy than a man in comedy? Can they do the same thing?
Comedy is okay, but clown is more difficult.
Yes.
Because if you are a young boy, you come home, your costume is completely dirty, or your mother still loves you.
Yeah.
If you are a girl, it's not sure your father still loves you. So for a woman, it's more dangerous to be idiot like for a man. And we can see when you teach, woman wants to be charming clown. But I knew some woman, the monster, fantastic, but not so many.
I think I'm more of a monster.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Come in.
Mi nombre es el Brache Bedando. ¿Por qué usted?
I'm producer Young Chomsky.
Tu nombre o el nombre del show Internet Radio TrueAnon. I'm kind of inventing a new language that is along the lines of Esperanto, but a bit of my own doing. It's sort of a polyglottish kind of tongue.
So you're going poly?
Yeah, I would like to maybe add a little bit of Vietnamese in there. I like the way that Vietnamese letters look. I just like it. When I see a sentence in Vietnamese, I get very excited. That could be the reason for the French staying there for so long, because they saw these things too and were very excited about it. My favorite words in other languages, one of them is French. It's "sûreté."
What's that?
I think that means, isn't it mean? I can't remember.
Okay. How would you use it?
Safety. It means safety. I thought it meant like defense or something, but it means safety.
So when are you saying that?
It's like Department of Public Safety or whatever, kind of shit like that.
I thought you meant like if a woman approaches you on the street.
Sûreté?
Yeah.
No, I generally like fall down on my hands and knees and then sort of circle her, sniffing at the ankles and then peeing on something nearby that, preventing her passage because, of course, there's a pool of urine.
She's the one saying it.
No, she's oftentimes they don't say much to me when I do these kind of things. Oftentimes they take out the phone and either obviously call the police or start filming or something. I have to beg them, please don't post that. Please don't post that. It's not like a sexual thing. I just, there's an animal in me and it needs to come out. And often the way it comes out is by acting kind of like a Pomeranian or one of these kind of sort of small, pathetic dogs that sort of just jumps around a lot. Anyways, we have a hell of a show for you, ladies and gentlemen. Do you speak French at all?
Un peu.
I don't think it smells very bad. No.
I can say deux crêpes bananes, s'il vous plaît. Je voudrais l'omelette avec fromage.
Panache. I can say panache sometimes. I don't know if that's a French word, but certainly it sounds very French, does it not? Panache.
Yeah. Resume.
Bibliothèque. Bibliothèque might be French and Spanish. We don't know.
Yeah.
The thing about the Romance languages is we don't know why they're called that. No, actually, we kind of do, right? Because that's some of the horniest countries we have, or at least back then.
I think still.
No. We have
who's hornier?
Don't make me say it. There's certain countries in Latin America that are quite horny.
Yeah.
Certain countries in the Caribbean that are quite horny. Jamaica's a very horny country. It's a very horny country. Okay. Obviously, there's certain areas of the subcontinent that are quite horny too. Like it's back then, like when Europeans sort of dominated the world. I mean, obviously, they still do to a great extent. Well, the Americans do. Their concept of horniness was very insular. They only thought that their fellow Europeans could be horny. Now, I think in this enlightened age, we see that all across the world, it manifests itself in similar ways, but different enough to kind of present us with a rainbow.
Okay.
You feel me?
Who do you think is not horny?
Well, I don't want to sound like whatever. I mean, I can't believe I forgot this. The Japanese are also very horny. Who do I think are not horny? Famously, the South Koreans.
Yeah,
are
it's
not
become
horny.
a problem.
It's a big problem. We don't know. I don't have enough data to know if the South Koreans are horny, but just use a lot of prophylactic measures. But it seems like they're just not horny.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Or at least they're not horny in person. I don't think of Canadians as particularly horny, nor Mexicans. I think the horniness of North America probably would fall with the U.S. Who else isn't that horny? I don't know. I don't think of East Africans as particularly horny people. I mean, I'm sure obviously people are horny there, but I don't think of that as like a horny nexus in the world. The colder nations, we're talking Norway, Iceland, Sweden. These places do not strike me as very horny, which is interesting because obviously I think it's because of the pungent diet they have, maybe.
Makes sense. Well, this would be a fertile ground for a future anthropological study. We could travel around and podcast.
Yeah, just rank all the nations by their sort of horniness, I'm not saying this is a judgment thing. Obviously, like, I'm not saying that it's bad to be. I'm just saying that, like, but horniness, I think the modern concept of horniness began in the Spain, France, Italy sort of triangle that we call that. The horny triangle, as scholars often refer to it as. Anyways, neither here nor there. It's a little bit here, a little bit there. Yeah. We are talking today to Marlon Ettinger, a many-time guest on TrueAnon, about some of Epstein's French connections. And when I say that, obviously it's the name of a famous movie and a less famous sequel. But when I say that, it does remind me, we probably have named an episode that before, so I guess I'll have to think of a different title. Regardless, here is l'interview pour les ears. Bonjour à tous les auditeurs du podcast TrueAnon. Bienvenue dans notre studio privé. J'ai le plaisir de vous présenter Marlon Ettinger, notre reporter en direct de France. Marlon, bienvenue dans l'émission.
C'est mon plaisir, Brace. Should we do the whole podcast in French?
That last sentence, Marlon, welcome to the show. When I was reading it out, I was like, oh, I can speak French.
I understood every word. It was pretty good, to be honest. I was surprised.
What's up with the JAI kind of stuff there?
J. It's like
je,
a.
Anyway. Okay. So like j'accuse.
J'accuse, exactly. It's the same thing.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, lest you j'accuse me of misleading you, here it is in English. We are joined today by Marlon Ettinger, a reporter and longtime TrueAnon guest. I feel like you've been coming on since the beginning of the show, back to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and his French connections. No doubt we've already named an episode such, and so we'll not be doing it this time. But there's kind of a lot to talk about. You remember at the trial, Marlon, because you were there with us, how Ghislaine's sisters would wear those little berets every day?
Very stylish, yeah.
Yeah. Well, stylish maybe. A beret and an old lady can sometimes look stylish. Sometimes it just makes you look like an old lady. For them, it was the latter. But I always took it as a sort of nod to their French heritage because Jeffrey Epstein, his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, longtime girlfriend and, let's say, business partner, Ghislaine Maxwell. Yes, people know that her father, Robert Maxwell, Czech, Jewish, and then British Labour Party MP in the Keir Starmer sort of vein of politics. But her mother was a French Protestant woman. And Ghislaine and her sisters, I believe, have French and maybe the brothers too. Maybe just Ghislaine. I don't know, but I know that Ghislaine certainly has French heritage, and so there's always been a little bit of the old country involved in the Epstein story. And Epstein, of course, obviously has his beautiful palatial apartments at 22 Avenue Foch. How do you pronounce that? Foch?
Foch.
Foch.
It's after a great marshal of the French Third Republic.
I know who Marshal Foch is, but I'm just like, I never knew how to pronounce his name. And in my head, I would just see it as Foch. But his great apartments there. However, his business and, let's say, social ties are a little deeper than it may first appear. To start us off, there's a new investigation, right?
There are 3 new criminal investigations so far in France. There's also a new investigation. The Tribunal of Paris announced that they were going to be looking into this stuff on the 14th, which is just the court of Paris. And there's 3 people who are now sort of in the visor, as they say. It's Fabrice Anon, Frédéric Chasselin, and Daniel Siad. And all these guys are super interesting. Chasselin was like a big orchestra conductor, and he maybe has the least far-ranging of the charges. He was clearly friends with Epstein, like a lot of people in France were, because like you said, Epstein lived in Paris a lot. I wouldn't say half the year, but he'd spend a lot of time in Paris, especially after his first conviction. He started spending a lot more time there. I think it was Thomas Volschow, him who sort of does a lot of great public records reporting on Epstein. He saw that if you look at the flight logs right after his conviction, he starts going a lot more to Paris. So he knew this guy Chasselin. He's a orchestra conductor, and he's sort of being investigated for sexual harassment. And the other 2 are sort of and that's sort of like a classic, sexual harassment case. The other 2 are more sort of in the world of Epstein and his connections, where it starts getting kind of murky and weird. Fabrice Anon and Daniel Siad. And one of them, Daniel Siad, has a big connection to a guy that we talked about before. And, people who are following this know about plenty when you talk about Epstein in France. Daniel Siad, who was this modeling agent procurer for Epstein, was, of course, good friends with Jean-Luc Brunel. And they seem to have worked together.
So Jean-Luc Brunel, as longtime listeners of the show, or even sort of, let's say, mild toe dippers into the kind of Epstein nexus will understand, was a modeling agent who was also business partners with Jeffrey Epstein. He and his brother were longtime Parisian partygoers, let's say. There's rape accusations going up against Jean-Luc Brunel dating back, I think, to the 1980s, maybe 1970s?
I've heard that from one person, that there were police reports back in the 80s against Brunel, but I've never found those reports myself.
I mean, he was the subject to a documentary that mentions how much of a piece of shit he was to women. I think that was dating from maybe the 1990s. He goes to the U.S. and he sort of falls in with the modeling world here in New York, and then meets Jeffrey Epstein, and the 2 of them very much hit it off. He is in a ton of just the photos that have come out in the latest batch of releases. He died in a Parisian jail in, what was it, 2020 or 2021?
I think it was 2021 now. It was right after the new year. It was in February. So yeah, 21. And he was hanged. He was found hanged. He was at La Santé prison, big prison in the middle of Paris. And, the guards, they do their circles and they look through these little peepholes, and they came around one of their circles and they found him hanged. He was apparently super depressed about the accusations. He claimed he was innocent. I talked to one person even who was a friend of his family. They said the family was devastated by the accusations. And they claim also that the government didn't do anything correct. They didn't put him under suicide watch, even though he'd been complaining and had tried to commit suicide before. Sort of a really familiar story, obviously, with him. And there's no investigation that's been released about that. They said there was going to be an investigation, the 3rd Judicial Police Department of Paris. There hasn't been. I've tried to find that report, but nobody will even say whether it exists, or when I say nobody, nobody in the government will give any update on the progress of that report.
Interesting. I mean, I want to, talk about Daniel Said here for a second, because for those of you who are following along at home, you can look at this is EFTA 01682078. And it's a DOJ document about Epstein's network, sort of complete with the web. This is, something that they're doing when they're kind of laying out their investigation. A ton of the names in the list that they have are blacked out and labeled as victims. But there's a few that are identified, and a few that are identified that aren't, I guess, immediately familiar to people who followed the Epstein case in a sort of, let's say, moderate manner. Daniel Said is investigated by Jean-Luc Brunel, it notes, as an alleged recruiter. So this guy has a interesting history. He is originally from Algeria, and he moved to Sweden sometime in the 1980s. And I assume he met Epstein via Jean-Luc Brunel.
That's sort of the assumption from the way they talk. He's always like brought over as Brunel's guy, and there'll be emails between Brunel and Epstein. And Siad sort of like mentions Brunel, like, oh, I talked to Jean-Luc the other day, or Epstein will ask Jean-Luc, like, oh, or Brunel will tell Epstein, like, oh yeah, I'll send Siad to take care of that type of thing. I don't know exactly when they met, but that's sort of the impression you get. He himself like worked in the fashion industry. He had like his email address is like something, it has one of his companies in it. It's like Fashion World TV. He had this string of sort of like seedy websites, and you can go back, online, and it's all like some people, when they initially found him, archived all his old websites. He would have like videos, on boats and stuff, the standard thing. So he clearly worked in the fashion industry and probably met Brunel around that time.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what he does essentially is kind of what Jean-Luc Brunel does, where he runs this modeling agency, but he also spends a lot of his time scouting, and particularly scouting he actually tends to scout in first world countries, or also scouts in first world countries. But like Brunel would go scout in Brazil and poor villages there, or in Eastern Europe, or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the Balkans. And so they would go to, let's say, economically deprived places, and they would find very young girls, take a bunch of pictures of them, and in the case of these two guys, seemingly also send them to Jeffrey Epstein. I just want to read out an email that Siad sent to Epstein, and it's kind of, he's actually might be worse at sending emails than Jeffrey Epstein, which is really a rare feat. His spelling can often be experimental, but I'm going to do my best. So this is from Daniel Siad to Jeffrey Epstein in 2012, obviously 4 years after Jeffrey Epstein was jailed for sexual contact with a minor. I am a positive person. That's my ground. I keep on with positive energies, and I have lots of respect for you. You have always been sincere with me. I lose some credibility from these girls, but there are millions of them out there. I paid their tickets and hotels for those Swedish aged 21 and 22 and the Slovakian 22. The Swedish decided to go to Ibiza. Slovakia is going back tomorrow. The French girl from Strasbourg went back this afternoon, even was coming for Switzerland for 3 days. The Russian girl has canceled her fly. I wanted to make for you a great surprise. It didn't work this time. I really hope that it worked next time. In this busyness, I feel like fishermen. Sometimes I catch quick, sometimes no fish. I really did good work for scouting in Scandinavia. Most of them will be ready to start with tomorrow at least. 5 of them, 16 and 17, will be ready for the next year. But I can't send you their pictures as no, which I find interesting that he says that. I can't send you their pictures, as you know. Paris, I found, may be a new star. I will be sending the pictures to Francesca tomorrow. In Sweden, I almost burned my images with agencies. They send requests to tomorrow. You know the story. The French, her name is blank. She is 15. Her parents checked me out, and they are very happy their daughter to start modeling. I'm going back to Stockholm, then Gotland for what we call Stockholm Week. All the girls from Sweden gathered there for 5 days, nonstop parties. To through my hooks. I think it's sort of continuing the fisherman reference there. All these expenses include blank ticket and her pocket money. Really happy to get out of here. A real nightmare. I spent 2,700 euros. And so it looks like Jeffrey Epstein is basically paying this guy to go around and meet girls and introduce them to him.
Yeah, bring them to him. There's another like email that's sort of like a classic one that describes that from 2009. He says, "Hello, Jeffrey. I just found an amazing one. She's 20 years old, but she looks younger. From Latvia, 5'8". She just did a world campaign for Nivea. Blah blah blah. I'm traveling with her to Paris this week. Let me know if you think it would be good to take her to Next, that modeling agency. With Brunel, and also what agency you think is appropriate for her in the U.S." She said she met Jean-Luc once in Denmark while she was there with Scoop Models. So yeah, it's exactly that sort of modus operandi. He finds these girls, brings them to the modeling agency, Next Models, or in other emails they talk about using Karen Models, which was Jean-Luc's modeling agency, and introduces them. And even sort of manages these girls. There's these one email chain with a girl named Leanne, or it's about a girl named Leanne. She actually hasn't mentioned it. And in all these emails, he's sending messages to his assistant. I think it's Leslie Groff in these emails. And then she's sending emails to Valdson Cotrin, who's the Paris butler. And she says, "Oh, give Leanne 600 euros, give Leanne 1,000 euros, give Leanne 250 euros. And, it's not said what he's meeting Leanne for, but she's in all these sort of Google Calendar reminders, meetings with people. And at one point, he seems to not want to see Leanne anymore, Epstein. Mm-hmm. And he says, "Oh, Leanne is texting me a lot. Can you tell her I don't want to talk to her?" He writes this to Siad. And then it just keeps going. There's 3 or 4 of these emails. And he's like, "Can you take care of her?" And Siad was like, "Yeah, but I don't have any money. You need to send me money." He's like, I'll pay for her. I'll reimburse you for the ticket to Latvia, because she's from Latvia, this woman. And eventually he does it. Siad brings her to Latvia, and he says, "Oh, she's a nice girl. I took care of her." So this is sort of what he does. He is scouting, but he's also clearly handling women more than just scouting as a modeling agent.
Yeah, and it's this is the other thing. It's there's very few businesses of this sort that Epstein is so hands-on with. And it's really unclear as to what the actual outcomes of these modeling contracts would be. I mean, we've done episodes on this before, but people kind of know at this point that the modeling world, especially at this level, it's a bit like maybe bringing girls to big cities and then introducing them to wealthy men and then keeping them all living 10 apiece in an apartment together. And that it's sort of like what Daniel Said is doing here is sort of half modeling scout, half maybe pimping for Jeffrey Epstein.
And that's basically what he's being investigated for. He denies it all. He's when some of this stuff was reported in the French media, he put out a video on his Twitter account. He has a Twitter account called Europeans for Donald Trump, mm-hmm. which I suspected was him for a while. There was some people. So it's sort of been known that he was a recruiter for 10 years, but not publicly. He's mentioned Stanley Pottinger, who was one of these lawyers for some of the victims. He sends an email internally. They got his number from Jean-Luc. And then he appears in some of the U.S. versus Maxwell documents, actually redacted. That email appears in that. So they were thinking of maybe investigating him. And they were thinking of investigating him in France also. His name, Daniel S., appears in charging documents. But that all came out, and so a lot of people figured out online. It wasn't me. It was these geniuses, online, a couple of years ago, who he was, and they found his Facebook page and everything. And he was a big Trump fan. He has this Twitter account going back years, and he used to sign his tweets years ago, Daniel Siad, which is how you kind of know it's him.
Yeah.
But when all these reports came out, he posted a video denying that he had done anything wrong. So it is now confirmed that account is his. Europeans for Donald Trump.
I want to mention before we move on a little bit, another email that he had actually sent to Jeffrey Epstein. This is one of the few that is about something besides modeling. So he sends one to Epstein saying, "I'm in Thailand, organized a meetings for a yank with royal family here in Bangkok. He signed the doctor in Bulgaria after he'd been tested himself. We're flying him here. We are having some clients already, probably opening a clinic here in Bangkok and Hong Kong. Jeffrey, it works. and believable, which I believe is supposed to be unbelievable. Jeffrey at work's unbelievable. He's already larged his penis. He already larged his penis. He's penis. This revolutionary moment I am witnessing in my lifetimes. Jeffrey at work's unbelievable. He's already enlarged his penis. This revolutionary moment I'm witnessing in my lifetimes. That is Yank Berry, a Canadian, I think, vegan or vegetarian food, like businessman, basically. He's also, I guess he was in the Kingsman as well, according to his Wikipedia, which I was a little confused by, because he looks a bit younger than that. He is might be having a different episode on him entirely, but it does appear that he, for some reason, is also working with Siad. Epstein later sends an email saying, "Do you have the name of the doctor in Bulgaria?" Yank said he thought you had the details. "I will be back on the 23rd. They're talking about meeting up in Paris. It is obviously that's not really the remit of this, within the remit of this episode, but Jeffrey Epstein does appear to be interested in penis enlargement procedures, or at least maybe considering his sort of peculiarities south of the border, maybe to fix whatever the fuck was wrong with his wiener. I don't know, but it's interesting because I'm like, Daniel Said here, this isn't like him going to Thailand to scout for models. This is him, and it's actually a more complicated story than that because it's kind of unclear if the woman that he's actually interfacing with is a real member of the royal family or somebody whose name just means descended from the royal family. But there is some kind of strange Bulgarian penis enlargement connection here. But there's real sort of talk of Daniel Said doing some pretty nasty stuff. So there's a website called France Info that I was looking at, and it has what appears to be a section of a interview between a police officer and a woman who is making accusations against Daniel Said. And the woman says, "He wanted me to meet girls for Epstein to give him massages, prostitution. He showed me pictures of girls. They were Moroccan, and I had to tell him if they might appeal to Epstein. I told him no, that he wouldn't be interested because I knew what was going on behind the scenes. I didn't want another girl to suffer." The police officer, "Am I to understand that Daniel Said's role was to act as a recruiter for women and for sexual purposes?" The woman, "Yes, and I think it wasn't just about Epstein, but about other important people."
Yeah, and Siad has been accused of rape himself. There's a model, a Swedish model, who in France now is sort of like filed criminal charges against him, which are technically, I think, outside of the statute of limitations. But there is still, even if something is outside of the statute of limitations, they have to investigate it. And she claimed that he threatened to murder her, to kill her when she was upset about this. But yeah, for other people as well, there was an interesting story in Le Figaro, which is like France's leading right-wing paper, where they talk about these orgies that they were having at Epstein's Paris house. This all came out in the investigation. They had this initial investigation into Epstein back in 2022, which was, closed in 2022. There were never any charges pursued. Nobody was ever prosecuted after Brunel. That's where Daniel S. comes up, and this idea that there may have been a network in Paris comes up. According to this document, which was the preliminary investigation, there were numerous old and rich men who participated at these orgies in Epstein's Paris house. That's the one on Maréchal Foch 22, Maréchal Foch. It was with this sort of profile. So when the Brunel case first started to be investigated in the French press back when Epstein was arrested and Brunel was arrested, a bunch of models came forward and testified against him in the press that he would use drugs. He would drug them and rape them. And so that's what was sort of investigated in this investigation. The judge found that they may have been what they call in French soumission chimique, where chemical submission, that these orgies were facilitated with designer drugs and date rape drugs.
It makes sense. There's emails in the files between, I think, Leslie Groff and Jeffrey Epstein, basically just giving lists of people who are coming to visit or stay at his Paris apartment. We're talking about people like Ariane de Rothschild, Terge Rod Larson, people kind of within the inner circle, like names that you would know. And then there's a separate list of girls that are being brought to the apartment at different times and being flown to Paris. And, obviously there's nothing that's spelled out in that. And, I don't want to say that it's for sure any evidence of anything actual there. But it would lead one to believe that perhaps he was introducing women to the equation or to this sort of social gathering scene for the purposes of some kind of orgy or something like this. We don't know. But it is that to me really stood out, that like even more directly than he was doing in New York, he was essentially matching up these times of people coming to visit him or stay at the apartment, because he often did let people stay with them, with these women that he was flying out, mostly from Eastern Europe, if memory serves. So Daniel Siad is not just a Jeffrey Epstein associate or a modeling scout or an accused rapist. In 2017, the president of the Kabylian government in exile, Ferhat Maheni, declared his first list of representatives around the world. On the list of names is Daniel Amar Siad, diplomatic representative of Kabyle in Saudi Arabia, United States, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. I don't know if it's meant to say just United Arab Emirates or actual United States or UAE, because from what I understand, he was the Gulf representative and US would sort of just be thrown in there. But I was kind of wondering, like, what is the Kabyle government in exile? And so Kabyle is a area east of Algiers in Algeria. It's on the coast, and it's a dense population, or it holds a dense population of a Berber ethnic group, or sort of a subgroup that speaks a distinct language, which you and I were talking about earlier. It does have a kind of crazy looking alphabet.
Yeah, it's like if you've ever seen the Ethiopian alphabet or something. It has like, I don't know how you describe it, but it's not a standard Latin alphabet. They have all sorts of their own symbols, which it looks cool. Yeah. I actually have a Kabyle place not too far from me. There's a lot of Kabyle people in, Paris, and because of course there's a lot of Algerians in France, and they have a really distinctive flag too. It's like yellow and green, but as you were mentioning earlier, they don't seem to like do a lot. The Kabyles, they have their independence movement, but they're not. You don't see rallies all the time or anything.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because I was not really very familiar with this at all. I mean, I know what Berbers are, and I know that there are various like independence movements or rebel groups that are sort of Berber led, or for Berber various independence movements basically. But I never really heard of this one. So in Algeria, after the victory over France, there was a process of Arabization, which is sort of standardizing Arabic as the language, and in all official capacities as like the written language and the spoken language, etc. in schools. Obviously, there's a different language that is spoken in large parts of the country, and so some parts of it, the process went okay. In Kabyle, it did not go very well. There was riots and protests in the 1980s. The government killed some people. There were various strikes going up until 2001, where there was a big, just a ton of violence. And this was obviously also during the Algerian Civil War. A bunch of conflict occurred there, but it wasn't like there was big armed Berber groups that were coming from this place. It was almost more like a protest movement. The MAK, which is the Movement for Autonomy of Kabyle, formed in 2001. As far as I can tell, it doesn't seem to be like a major force in the country. I was looking at their website. You can kind of get like IDs and passports and stuff like that, but they're sort of like, it's like getting one from Sealand or something. Like it's kind of just like, it's like a protest move or like a souvenir a little bit. But they were formed in the aftermath of the 2001 repression. In 2010, I think is where they actually formed a government in exile led by this Ferhat Meheni. He is seems like a little bit of a wingnut. You were saying that he actually like knew people he grew up around people from the Algerian government when he was a kid.
He has family who may have closer connections to the government. He when he stripped all his social media like a year and a half ago after this report came out about a guy named Daniel S. on this big investigative program in Paris, and some people like captured a lot of stuff from it, including like pictures of him with Jean-Marie Le Pen and stuff. But yeah, he may have someone in his family who was pretty close to the president. I'm still sort of working on confirming that right now.
Yeah, I know that MAK actually, I think, runs people for office in France, and I believe that they are sort of seen as a far-right party. I know that Eric Zemmour actually quoted Ferhat in a television debate at one point. And so I guess they're kind of aligned to like the Le Pen, sort of Zemmour, a part of the political spectrum there.
The impression you always get with them is that like Israel recruits from them for their intelligence services. But yeah, it's kind of, I just say that's my impression. I don't actually know that he was recruited for them. Daniel Siad.
Daniel Siad, we don't know, but Ferhat, the leader of the party that Daniel Siad seems to be an officer in, did cause a big stir in Algeria. Well, I would say a medium stir in Algeria, but he caused a little bit of a stir by actually going to Israel and meeting with members of the Likud party, which is a pretty big deal for an Algerian. And he gave an interview to the Times of Israel, I think last year, in which basically they're actually just setting him up to say things that they want to hear. And he just dutifully sort of recites like, absolutely, the IRGC is operating in Algeria. This is actually a quote from the interview. He says, Algeria needs Iranian centrifuges. Iran needs Algerian uranium from Taner and Tamanrasset. Both seek nuclear weapons covertly and dangerously. At the same time, the Polisario, which I guess would be the Polisario Front, serves as their regional proxy, which is interesting because I'm like, he's saying that Algeria, in a Israeli newspaper, that Algeria is trying to covertly build nuclear weapons with the assistance of its big brother Iran, which, as people who are following the news might know, Algeria has long had, let's say, not so great relations with the Israeli government or the state of Israel. And this is just propaganda. And so I think that you can see that he's essentially functioning as like an Israeli agent of influence. And again, we're not talking about Daniel Siad right now. We're talking about the guy who's in charge of Daniel Siad's party. Siad, for his part, presents himself as a Berber Jew. I was looking through, I sent this to Marlon yesterday, a bunch of sort of diaspora pages that were kind of debating whether he was Jewish or not, or just like adopted the Jewish identity to maybe get ahead in Europe. But, he moved to Sweden in 1980. The last name Siad, as far as I can understand, is not necessarily a Jewish name from this region of the world, but it can be. I mean, I don't know if there's really so much you want to hang your hat on with that, but it is interesting at least that there's debate around it. He is so he's under investigation now. I mean, do you see this going ahead?
It's like every investigation they've had into this stuff in France. It seems like a lot of the facts are like beyond the statute of limitations. So in that sense, I don't know anything about the investigation beyond the fact that there's this rape complaint and also that they're looking into all sort of contacts of Jeffrey Epstein and they're calling on new testimony. So if new testimonies come that are outside of the statute of limitations, it could go somewhere. But of course, it's hard in France because, of course, one of the reasons why Epstein might have started coming to France so much after his conviction in the U.S. is because France has a much lower age of consent. And, they talk about all these women in the emails. Like you mentioned, there's 15 years old, 16, 17. I don't know if that would be criminal in France right now. But we'll see on that investigation. It's funny you mentioned all that stuff about the leader of the Kabyle movement being sort of a mouthpiece. Siad's politics are like kind of the same. I was just looking now, and I think he actually deleted his Twitter account finally because I can't find the messages. But
I saw that. I don't think he has it anymore.
But when I found out about his account, I like messaged him, not reaching out to him as a guy who thought he was Daniel Siad, but like he posted all this stuff against it's like the standard sort of Muslims have been trying to destroy us since the beginning. He said that as a Kabyle, so he sort of like mirrored all that stuff, and we need to protect the West. Donald Trump protects the West. Israel protects the West. That was sort of his thing, completely.
That's why it made sense that like Le Pen and Zemmour would sort of align themselves with some of these guys because they sort of serve as these, what do they call it, a native informant about the dangers of the what is it, Islamo-gauche?
Islamo-gauchisme, yeah.
Islamo-gauchisme and le wokisme that is taking over France. I want to move along to Olivier Colomb. So this guy this has to do with Northern Africa as well. I would say a lot of this that we're talking about has to do with Northern Africa and France. So he was a diplomat who actually started with the France Afrique stuff. I guess it was a department in the French government that dealt specifically with that he was a sort of came up under. And then he sort of ascended with President Sarkozy during Sarkozy's amazing reign from 2007 to 2012. And to start us off, I want to actually give a little bit of a glimpse into his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein with reading out an email. This is from Olivier Colomb in 2015, in October of 2015, to Jeffrey Epstein. He says, "Need to talk urgently to someone close to HBJ. Something to check. Who should I talk to?" And Epstein replies, "Would you like me to call HBJ?" And of course, that would be Hamad bin Jassim bin Taber Al Thani, the former prime minister of Qatar. At that time, the former prime minister. His reign sort of mirrored Sarkozy's in that. I think he was in office from 2007 to 2013. These two appear to have met via Terj Rod Larson, who we've talked about on this program many times, diplomat from Norway and head of the International Peace Institute and a big UN muckety muck. What can you tell me about Olivier Colomb?
Yeah, like you said, from like 2007 to 2012, he was Sarkozy's chief diplomatic advisor. He started off as sort of like a diplomat, but he became an important guy for Sarkozy. And then after that, Sarkozy didn't get reelected, so he took a job in October 2013 at the Edmond de Rothschild Group, which is like another really important organization to understand Epstein's influence in France. Colomb and he was an international advisor there. And it was during this time when he was international advisor where it seems like Epstein and Colomb were like really good friends, or when they became really good friends. They sort of met through Terj Larson, right, at a diplomatic event. And I've seen it written somewhere that it was through Ariane de Rothschild at the Rothschild Group, or the Edmond de Rothschild Group, because there's two. There's Rothschild & Co. and Edmond de Rothschild. And we're talking about Edmond de Rothschild, but they're both investment banking groups. And so, like, for instance, here's one representative exchange between them in October 2013. Epstein asks Colomb when he's coming to New York, and he asks him if there's, like, anything that he's doing. And Colomb says, "Well, the pleasure of seeing you, of course, or I hope." And then he also says, "I have to take care of certain things, political things. I might go to Ethiopia in the beginning of November instead of New York." And they exchange comments, a lot of comments about women, which have been reported everywhere. He compares Epstein, the women he's with, he says he has like an aquarium of women. And they sort of joke around about the different types of women. And Saudi Arabia, they have great white sharks.
Oh, yeah.
He says they sort of like disgustedly say, "Oh, well, I hate the black-headed shrimp. You get the shit in your mouth from them."
Yeah, he said, he says, Epstein says, "On my island in the Caribbean with an aquarium full of girls." Olivia says, "The king of Saudi Arabia has a few white sharks in his at his Jeddah palace. I totally prefer yours. Sure, I would enjoy the view." Epstein says, I guess in in relation to MBS. He says, as to a Russian, I guess some might refer to them as white sharks. Olivia says, as long as you don't have any hammerhead ones, I like white sharks. Epstein says, no, some are shrimps. You throw away the head and keep the body. Olivia says, I like shrimp, but not so much if it's too pink, although I'm definitely more into white than any other color. I like your philosophy. And then Epstein says, I can't even think of the smell of black shrimp. Ugh.
Yeah, and they were making all sorts of these comments. They'd constantly discuss women. At one point, Coulomb and Epstein even discuss Leah Pissar, who is the daughter of Samuel Pissar, who is Robert Maxwell's lawyer. And, Coulomb says, oh, she's not that bad to see. And he even sort of adds, it's so like, oh, she's also very involved in Franco-American relationships. All these conversations, even about women, are sort of wrapped up in them discussing French diplomacy or American diplomacy or like high-level diplomatic talks. And then right after saying, oh, she's very involved in French-American relations, he adds, I've also found that Castelbejac, who's like a designer in France, has his showroom right next to my new apartment. I've already seen a few models going, all to your taste.
Leah Pissar would also be, I believe, Anthony Blinken's stepbrother.
I think that's right, because Pissar is, Pissar the elder is his stepfather.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, what a small world it is. It appears that Epstein was trying to get in touch with Sarkozy at some point because his first target, and this is how he came to know Olivia Coulomb, but his first target was Consuela Remert, who is the half-sister of Sarkozy's wife, who I think is in trouble right now due to some of the Gaddafi campaign finance stuff, to bring it back to North Africa a little bit. Sarkozy's wife is, rather. She worked for Nicolas Sarkozy in international affairs and is introduced to Epstein via Boris Nikolic, Bill Gates' science advisor. And he's kind of wondering what Boris is like, what should I say to her? And Epstein says, you might remind her that as Nicholas is going to try to revamp the financial markets, my ideas are new and unique. There isn't, I looked through Epstein and Consuela's emails together. There's no real, maybe I missed something, but there's no real indication that she was able to make that introduction. However, he's working two tracks at this time. He's trying to do it through the Sarkozy's wife's half-sister, and he's also trying to do it via Terje Rod Larson, who introduces him to Olivia Coulomb. And in fact, there's an email where they talk about it. Terje says, I hope you are enjoying everything in the City of Light and in your wonderful apartment. Foreign Minister of Bahrain called and invited me to come and discuss, but strictly in my IPI, International Peace Institute, capacity. I rather liked it and will go, of course, probably week after next. The guy in Paris I want you to meet is Olivier Coulomb. He is a close advisor of Sarko and is the boss of Consuela. Shall I set up a meeting? Where would you like to do it, if so? Send info on real estate in Vienna. Stay in touch. Warmest, Olivier Coulomb. One thing that should be mentioned, because Consuela doesn't appear to be able to get him access to Nicolas Sarkozy, he actually does introduce Consuela, again, Sarkozy's wife's half-sister, to Jess Staley in one of the emails. So he is making these sort of connections behind the scenes here. There isn't, as far as I know, actual hard proof that he met Sarkozy, that Jeffrey Epstein met Sarkozy. I think the two of them would have quite enjoyed each other's company. But Mediapart did find an email where Epstein is seeking a beautiful woman to accompany him to a dinner at the palace. Although Sarkozy apparently has come out and said a meeting did not happen. Although he's like in jail, I think, right now. I think he's out of jail right now. But he spent I think some of the later weeks of 2025 in jail for ripping off Gaddafi.
3 weeks. Yeah. He's out on appeal. So there'll be the appeal. And then, I don't know if he did meet Sarkozy, but when this, Coulomb also has other political connections. He's apparently been advising Marine Le Pen on sort of African issues. Because after Coulomb left Edmond de Rothschild, he sort of reinvented himself with all these mining companies. He sat on a bunch of boards, and he has a London consultancy where he works with these companies. And this story came out, Africa Intelligence reported it, describing him as an advisor. And I asked a couple of people in the RN about this. That's sort of the national executive level. And this one person, Louis Alliot, actually, who used to date Marine Le Pen and is now the vice president of the party. They've since broken up. He said, "Oh, well, he wasn't an official advisor. He gave some advice a few times, but it wasn't a counselor position." And I asked where did they meet? And he said, "I don't know exactly, but I think it was in LR-RN circles." And so LR is Sarkozy's party. Yeah. And it's the traditional right-wing party. It used to be called something else, RPR, before Sarkozy renamed it LR. He's renamed it Les Républicains. And they've sort of got closer and closer over the years as sort of the RM becomes mainstream conservative party. And there's a lot of connections between them. There's even an alliance between the party in the legislative elections. So it makes sense that if he had these connections with the LR, he swam in the same circles as Sarkozy. But again, there's nothing definitive on that.
It is interesting as he's working for Edmund de Rothschild. He does send Epstein a message that says, sitting next to the special advisor to the Crown Prince of Bahrain at a gala dinner. Otherwise, are you interested in North Korea? Epstein replies, very. Olivia says, I have something for you then. Huge, ultra confidential. Come to Moscow with me in January? Epstein says, I like the idea. In fact, one of the reasons I wanted to go to Mongolia was the president there just came back from North Korea. I also saw Bill Richardson last week, and we discussed it as he had been there many times. However, he is a bit of a buffoon. Olivia replies, issue is very sensitive. Have to see you. Where are you week starting 16th of December? I find that very intriguing. And, I've been trying to look into maybe more chatter around this stuff with Epstein. But whatever this huge, ultra confidential thing that Olivia Colomb, while working for Edmund de Rothschild, is working on, possibly with the Russians in relation to North Korea, is just, fascinating that Epstein was so interested in it.
Well, this French journalist Mark Endewald wrote this great investigation, and he sort of notes that there's more than 1,000 messages, in the emails that mention North Korea. And he was particularly interested in the nuclear program. I can't believe we forgot to mention it, but, Colomb also worked with Tony Blair before, as, when Tony Blair was this international consultant.
Of course.
And then he was on the board of Endeavor Mining, which was a gold company managed by Sébastien de Montessus. And he was, the former number 3 at Areva, which is a really big French company, but that's sort of going off track. Endeavor Mining is sort of the North Korea connection. The primary shareholder in Endeavor Mining is an Egyptian billionaire named Naguib Sawiris. And he apparently was the guy who gave Kalam the opportunity in North Korea. Between 2008 and 2018, Sawiris invested with his company called Orascom in building North Korea's 3G phone network. So Endewald was sort of speculating that it might have been through Sawiris that Kalam had this business opportunity that he would then pass on to Epstein.
Interesting. There's also quite a lot of mining that happens in North Korea as well.
Rare earths, yeah.
Okay, wow, I got to read that. It was via Colomb that Epstein gets to know Ariana Rothschild, the wife of Benjamin Rothschild, and steering, ostensibly alongside her husband at the time, the ship of the Edmund de Rothschild group. So according to Le Monde, they're introduced via Terje Rod Larson and via Olivia Colomb, who is working for Rothschild at the time. Ariana Rothschild seems to see use in Epstein pretty much immediately, or at least Epstein makes himself quite useful immediately. At the time, there was a U.S. government crackdown on Swiss banks that were being used to hide assets and dough from Uncle Sam. So this program, I think it's called the Swiss Bank Program, some boring name like that, started in August 2013, extended from, I believe, until 2016. More than 80 banks got NPAs, non-prosecution agreements, and collected $1.36 billion. This is ostensibly for like tax fraud stuff that American citizens were doing via Swiss banks. Switzerland obviously has banking laws that favor discretion and secrecy, which is actually it's in part due to several things, or it's due in part to several things, including, Switzerland's supposed neutrality, although they've kind of dropped that since the war in Ukraine. But also due to French intelligence penetration of the Swiss banking system in the interwar years, I think it was, or maybe actually, I think it was before then. It might even be pre-World War I. The secrecy has been eroding for many years. There was a big Holocaust bank account scandal in the 1990s that some people might be familiar with. There was the UBS whistleblower case, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what the DOJ said that Edmond de Rothschild was up to in Switzerland. So Edmond de Rothschild, it was a guy, but it's now the name of a private bank. Like, it's like the Rothschild, or one of the Rothschild sort of banking companies. And it's a private bank, but it also is like a holding company. It's just like a giant business, I guess, is the simplest way to refer to it. But they do banking for, I'd say they do a little bit of Swiss banking on the side here. This is what the DOJ says. For decades prior to and through 2013, Edmond de Rothschild Switzerland aided and assisted U.S. clients in opening and maintaining undeclared accounts in Switzerland and concealing the assets and income they held in these accounts. EDR used a variety of means to assist U.S. clients in concealing their undeclared accounts, including by providing traditional Swiss banking products such as hold mail, code name, and numbered account services. So this is Bryce speaking again, I'm not reading anymore. One of the notable things about Swiss bank accounts is that oftentimes you're just given a number and it's not like assigned to your name, and only certain people at the bank know that your name is associated with that number. It goes on to say, assisting clients in using sham entities such as structures as nominee beneficial owners of the undeclared accounts, providing offshore credit cards, cash cards, and debit cards to repatriate funds from the undeclared accounts, structuring transfers of funds from undeclared accounts to evade currency transaction reporting rules, facilitating the covert repatriation of undeclared accounts via cash withdrawals, the purchase of luxury goods, and transfers to the foreign bank accounts of non-U.S. friends, family, and business associates, accepting and suggesting the use of IRS forms that falsely state under penalties of perjury that the sham entities beneficially own the assets in the undeclared amounts, and divesting U.S. securities from its undeclared U.S. accounts for the purpose of subverting its qualified intermediary agreement with the IRS. So what does this sound like? I mean, it is classic Swiss banking, but it also really kind of sounds like money laundering here.
Yeah, but I mean, they accused, Edmond de Rothschild of helping Americans facilitate all this. I don't think they ever claimed what they were helping them do, but they claimed that they were covering that up for helping like rich Americans to hide their assets, right?
Yeah.
To do what with them, who knows? And this was a problem for the Edmond de Rothschild group. They were thinking that they were going to get hit with like an $80 million dollar fine for this. And so who does Ariane de Rothschild turn to but Epstein to help sort this out? And Epstein is like really well placed at the time to sort this out because he knows somebody in the U.S. government or who had just left the U.S. government who might be able to help them. And that, of course, is Kathy Rumler. I think that's how you pronounce her name, right? And there's been a lot reported about her because they were like best friends, Kathy Rumler and Epstein. But she was deputy AG a month before Epstein asked her. He asked, we have the email here. The Rothschild Bank is run by Ariane Rothschild. Her husband, Benjamin, is chair in name only. The bank name is Bank Edmond de Rothschild. What she means is it's her who's like running day to day, Ariane, not Benjamin. There was, speculation he might have had sort of some substance abuse problems, et cetera. But basically, she was in charge, and Epstein wanted that. He pushed that because of his friendship with her. Epstein writes, they have a Justice Department problem like every other Swiss bank. Are you prohibited from involvement? And Rumler says, no prohibition. And then...
So keep in mind, this is, just like you're saying here, she had resigned from being deputy AG a month before. This email is sent in August of 2014. The investigation was announced 1 year before. She stepped down in July of 2014. And so all Epstein's got wrapped up in this pretty much immediately.
Yeah, and he, works his magic. Instead of 80 million, they end up paying $45.5 million. And Rothschild is like super grateful. She says, "Yes, congratulations and a giant thank you. I'm relieved that it's settled and over. Now we can start moving forward."
Yeah, Epstein responds to that with a really interesting message. He says, "Good luck today. 1, let's get this closed. 2, have Kathy meet with David and his people. 3, review Rockefeller. 4, hire asset woman. 5, do we use DOJ and its harsh language to remove Benjamin? 6, begin family plan, Siswain. 7, look for partners." To which she replies, "Yes, and deep thanks for your amazing help." Wow.
And that is sort of what happened. Benjamin was the heir. Ariane married into it, right? And you found out something about Marianne.
Okay, I saw your face pause, and I know what you want me to say here. I don't want to say this.
Oh.
I do feel like it's necessary to point out. Obviously, the Rothschild family has been alleged to be Jewish. And in this day and age, when one finds out that a certain person involved in things that people thought was Jewish isn't Jewish, I feel like it's perhaps we can point these things out. Aryan Rothschild, one might call her, is German. She is not Jewish. She married into the family. And for many, many years, there was essentially a prohibition on the male Rothschilds. In fact, I think for centuries, on male Rothschilds marrying a non-Jewish person, because obviously Jewish heritage is passed down via the mother. And any non-Jew that they would marry had to convert. She has never converted. Apparently, according to Jerusalem Post, she maybe still does slightly. She practices Judaism slightly. But 2 of the daughters do not identify as Jewish. 2 sometimes identify as Jewish. I guess it's probably more complicated to explain that you're a non-Jewish Rothschild to people if you are one. So you're probably just like, yeah, whatever, I'm Jewish. But Ariana de Rothschild is not Jewish. I just want to point that out there. And neither is Nikki Hilton. She also did not convert. She's also married to a Rothschild. Le Monde actually reported that a Rothschild executive told them that Rumler was able to cut the DOJ settlement in half. So it's crazy though. Also think about this. They're accused of all of these insane crimes that they get to sign an NPA and then just pay $45 million. Like that's nothing to them.
No, and then they did sort of push Benjamin Rothschild out. Epstein, who was good friends with Ariane, thought that she was cut out better to run the company. And, this settlement happens. At the start of 2015, Benjamin de Rothschild hands operational control of the bank to his wife. Ariane de Rothschild isn't sure that she can do this. She told the Financial Times it wasn't my aim to be chief executive and that she only stepped in during these negotiations. And, behind the scenes, she was sort of freaking out. She said in an email in February 2015 to Epstein, "I'm freaking out and scared I won't be up to the job." Epstein, in another email, writes to her that he's there for her. "You never have to hide from me. I can listen and advise or just listen. There is nothing you can tell me that shocks me." And this relationship continued. They were not just business associates, but they were good friends. They sent each other gifts. Ariane de Rothschild sent, her daughters to visit New York, and they would, see Jeffrey Epstein. And and you mentioned the estate plan, right? The next discussion estate plan. Well, Benjamin dies just 6 years later from a heart attack at 57.
50, in his 50s.
Now, like I said, there is some speculation that he may have had some substance abuse problems, but I mean, Epstein was involved in every aspect of her life and helping her control the bank. He, when she took control, he also talked about hiring decisions. He gave lists of executives that he wanted hired at Edmund de Rothschild. He tried to get Jess Staley hired. He tried to get Leon Black and the Apollo Group to sort of merge almost with Edmund de Rothschild. All of that never ended up happening, but he was recommending names to be hired at the bank. And so I wouldn't say he was like legally in control of the bank, but he was one of the main people behind the Edmund de Rothschild Group in that time period.
It's just totally insane. Another thing that's obviously very funny too is that when some of this stuff started coming out and her relationship with Epstein started to take place in the public consciousness, she denied to the Wall Street Journal that they had a very close relationship. She was like, "Oh, I asked him a couple questions here and there throughout the years. I didn't know about any of the bad stuff." But as we're finding out from some of this shit, I mean, the fortunes of the one Jeffrey Epstein and the usurper Rothschild here were very closely intertwined during the last epoch of his life. Because I want to move along to the next person that we're going to talk about, who was also, surprise, surprise, a Edmund de Rothschild employee at one point, Fabrice Anon. So this guy is also another longtime diplomat who, according to Mediapart, did his national service in Tel Aviv. We don't love to hear that. And Epstein appears to know him from his work at the UN in New York, where he worked from 2006 to 2013, where I believe he was the deputy to Terj Rod Larson when Terj was the Secretary General's special envoy.
Yeah.
I mean, Epstein appears to have this sort of similar relationship where he's a kind of a back and forth between some, let's say, Gulf gentlemen and people in diplomatic circles, where he sends one email. Epstein sends this email with the subject, "Please call him to set up UN meeting, Dubai." And then the body of the email reads, Mohammed El Gergawi, Minister of State for Ministerial Affairs, and then lists cell phone numbers. So that would be, of course, Mohammed Abdullah Al Gergawi, who is the Minister of Cabinet Affairs for the UAE, who Epstein is sort of running interference with between him and the UN here. Fabrice replies to the email, "Many thanks." Who is this guy?
I mean, he's a diplomat, basically, like you described, and the way he sort of comes into the story now and why he's being investigated is because he was previously investigated in the U.S. by the FBI, and in 2013 there was a 200-page FBI report that had evidence of visits to child pornography sites, text messages, etc. Like we just showed here, emails mixing work at the UN and private conversations. There's emails that indicate he was helping Epstein get visas for women to come and visit him. Apparently the FBI even set up a sting. They posed as a Frenchman who was going to give him his son at a Washington hotel. Aiden never showed up, but he does get wind of this investigation and he flees the country. Not by plane, but he drives a car across the Canadian border and then flies back. He uses his own money to get back to France. And like you mentioned, then in the next year, he takes a job at Edmund de Rothschild Bank. And now he's under investigation for that, of course.
Yeah, there's some, I think there's some question whether his colleagues knew that this big FBI operation was targeting him.
Yeah, apparently the ambassador to the UN at the time, who was Gerhard Herrault, he's also been the ambassador to America and Israel. He apparently reviewed this report. And then there was also apparently an internal Quai d'Orsay report. Quai d'Orsay is the foreign ministry in France into this. And so that's, I think, what the investigation is looking into now as well. Whether the foreign ministry knew about this and took no action. The FBI says they didn't, prosecute because he was a diplomat and they figured they should bring it to the French first to decide what they were going to do. And apparently they did nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's unclear where he exactly met Epstein. I would assume, I don't know who introduced Terj Rod Larson to Epstein. I don't think that we have that yet. Maybe we do, but I just haven't seen it. But it is fascinating how Epstein is building this nexus between like these UN guys and these guys who are like high up muckety mucks at the UN, and then their sort of diplomatic networks at home and in their diplomatic services of the various countries, because Epstein also uses a few people from the Norwegian diplomatic services to do things like get visas for girls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then once sort of scandal hits, or they're pushed out of the position, like Colomb is when Sarkozy is not reelected, he's able to facilitate their transition to the private sector. And then when they've advanced there for a little bit, he is also able to finesse those connections into like his new world of diplomatic connections that he's building. I mean, he mentions in an email with Olivier Colomb, he wanted to go to Mongolia. We've covered this on the show before, but he was in cahoots with Ehud Barak. He was essentially revamping Mongolia's defense industry. And he was meeting at the WEF with the former Prime Minister of Norway, former Prime Minister of Australia, and the Mongolian president to talk about their defense. And so it's just, you sort of see this kind of web that he's building in real time with these connections.
The Ehud Barak, relationship is fascinating. I think it's one of those things where like there needs to be more reporting on it, because there's an official narrative of when they met. But I don't know if it's true, I don't know. I'm just sort of speculating, but apparently they only met after he was, prime minister. I don't know if you have dug into that on the show, but yeah.
Yeah. When we've talked about it a few times on the show, but it's hard to say, because a lot of this comes from Ehud Barak, who obviously it's in his interest to downplay everything. And sort of the narrative that comes out from the Barak side is that like, Ehud did not, he didn't prepare for private life. Like he didn't know what he was going to do business wise after he was no longer prime minister. And it turns out that he has many of the same interests that Jeffrey Epstein and basically all of his friends have, which is Africa, mining, defense stuff, finance, and technology. I mean, Epstein at certain points he emails Peter Thiel and represents himself as a representative of the Edmond de Rothschild Bank. Like this is this kind of like, I don't know what you would even call it, but like this network that he's building. Some of it's built on bluster. Like Epstein, Thomas Volshow, who we were talking about earlier, who's a fantastic researcher on Epstein stuff. He has this sort of viewpoint that Epstein was just kind of one of those amazing con men of all time. And I do kind of agree with that to some to an extent. Like he does bullshit, like that is without a doubt. Like he does, he acts like he's really close to everybody in emails to people. And obviously, when people talk about their relationship with Epstein now, they seek to downplay it, and so you can't really take anybody's word for it, because numerous people have like verifiably lied about their connections to Epstein and how many times they met him, what they were relying on him for. But he does do this, we can see it happen in the emails to an extent. But on the other hand, like he seems to be very well connected and useful to a large number of truly powerful people.
Yeah. And, by that same token, he would try to use those connections to meet other people. There's this whole sort of like thing that played out in 2014, 2015, when he was trying to get in touch with the CEO of Hermes, Alexandre Dumas, and he tries to use Ehud Barak to get him, to get a lunch with him. He proposes this, or a dinner. They propose this informal group dinner, which includes Michel Hazanavicius, who was directed The Artist, Axel Dumas, his wife, Ehud Barak, two 40-something CEOs, another businessman named Charles Begbitter. The dinner never happens because Barak's like schedule doesn't, he's only in Paris for a day, but he's constantly scheduling in Paris these meetings with people, and he often uses Barak as a way to try to get in touch with these people. And the whole Dumas Hermes thing is interesting too. But
tell me about it. I don't actually know that much about this. If my memory serves, because those pictures came out of Epstein with all these boxes that said CIA, but that was actually from his visit to the Hermes workshop, right?
Oh, I hadn't made that connection. Was that from that?
I think it was. I knew it wasn't from the actual CIA because I don't know if the CIA has giant boxes that say CIA all over them.
You know, you're right. That is
headquarters.
from that. I have the picture in front of me. It's with Woody Allen and Axel Dumas, who was the CEO of Hermes. They went to his workshop in Pantin. Well, Hermes's workshop, where and Hermes is like a luxury company. They make bags.
I'm head to toe, brother.
Head to toe. Exactly.
I'm head to toe.
And they have their workshop in Pantin, which is like a suburb in Paris. And Dumas and Hermes claim that this was all through Woody Allen. Like, they had invited Woody Allen and his wife and his family to come to the workshop, and Epstein just sort of tagged along at the end of 2013. But, none of that really seems plausible because there's all these emails going back and forth between Axel Dumas's assistant and Epstein's assistant trying to set up a lunch. They mentioned that they met at a performance by Tilda Swinton at one point and talked briefly, and they were trying to figure out how to get on the phone or to meet in person. And it doesn't seem like the meetings ever really happened, but it seems much more like they didn't happen because of scheduling, because of Ehud Barak's schedule, because of Axel Dumas' schedule. They were definitely actively pursuing this meeting, but Dumas completely denies it. And it's sort of interesting how, it's sort of, pedestrian. But what I found interesting about this was sort of how, the story about Hermes played out. Because I don't know if you've seen this, stuff online where everyone's claiming, Hermes were the only people that turned down Jeffrey Epstein's, connections.
I have seen that.
Yeah, there was, in 2016, he donated to some charitable foundation that Hermes runs, and they turned down the donation. And I saw some reel about it yesterday with 500,000 likes, finally something positive in the Epstein files. But in reality, the person running the charity probably has no involvement with Axel Dumas, and they were trying to set up a meeting. Annie Moe, who's the head of Image 7, which is a communications agency that does PR for Hermes and Dumas, initially told reporters who asked about the meetings that Jeffrey Epstein tried several times to get in touch with Hermes, but he declined 2 invitations and leaves it at that. And then, when it comes out that they have emails and photographs showing that there was a meeting between them, they say, Woody Allen dragged him along. And then something I found super interesting was this idea that Hermes was not involved went really big on French social media. It went, and it was boosted by all these or former journalists who now work for Annie Moe's agency. And I think the reason for that all is there's some text messages between Bannon and Epstein, Steve Bannon, of course, where basically Epstein implies that he was advising Axel Dumas during a takeover attempt that Bernard Arnault led against the company through LVMH. LVMH is the biggest company, not in the world, but in France for sure. Bernard
It's
Arnault
one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah. And, Arnault tried to take over Hermes and sort of failed. And Bannon's like, oh, do you know anything about this? And sort of cryptically, Epstein is like, oh yeah, Dumas had a better advisor. That's why he wasn't able to take him over.
Yeah, it's, there's another, well, maybe we'll get to that in a second, but it's interesting. Everybody, the playbook is always just deny that you ever met him. When somebody presents, uncontestable proof that you did meet him, be like, oh yeah, I met him one time. I don't remember much about him. Or you do the Howard Lutnick thing where you say, I was so disgusted that I fled the scene immediately. And then when someone comes out with proof that that's not true, you just kind of go silent and then deploy the crisis PR agency. There's another exchange between Epstein and Bannon where Bannon is talking about, well, there's actually 2 I want to mention. There's one where Bannon's talking about how he's going to help Le Pen beat Macron finally. And there is kind of a lot of overlap between Epstein's kind of network and, as we've discussed, the Le Pen nexus here as well. Bannon was unsuccessful in that attempt.
Well, that's what everyone in like the RN now claims. But there were texts back from around 2019 when Bannon was on this like tour through Europe. You know, he was promoting Matteo Salvini and Le Pen, and he was apparently meeting with a lot of people in the RN, National Rally, Le Pen's party, to figure out how to finance their European election campaign for the European Parliament, because they couldn't get a loan from banks, you know, back then, and they had no money of their own. Apparently, they were still paying off their previous debts. And what they finally settled on was like this idea of selling patriot bonds to their voters, which is literally what they refer to it as, and you get a little share of the victory. And according to these texts between Bannon and Epstein, they had been like thinking about how to finance. So there's no allegation that Epstein financed them, but Bannon and Epstein were talking about how to get the financing, and everyone in the RN denies it. I talked to Louis Alliot. He, told me to go talk to the treasurer, Wallerand de Saint-Just. He said, personally, I've never met Mr. Bannon, and I've never even talked with him. I have no idea about his role, and I myself don't know about the loans, which was kind of interesting because nobody actually could say whose idea it was to do these loans. And you'd think the treasurer would know. He was treasurer from 2009 to 2021, so completely in this time period. But Bannon and Epstein talk a lot about France together, actually, particularly in that time period, 2018, 2019. They go into, there's so many names. There's Jacques Lang, who we haven't even got into, who was the former culture minister, who was great friends with Epstein. He invited him to like this ceremony at the Louvre for the 30th anniversary of the pyramid being put in. His daughter, Caroline Lang, was close friends with Epstein. She's may have even stood to have inherited $5 million from him. Mediapart had this big investigation how Epstein was all involved in with offshore accounts, with their wealth. And Lang, sort of even coming back to LVMH in that conversation between Bannon and Epstein says, oh yeah, well, first Bannon asks Epstein, do you know Bernard Arnault? He goes, no, but we have a lot of close personal friends. He names Jacques Lang. Jacques Lang, until very recently, was the head of the Institut du Monde Arabe, the Institute of the Arab World, which is like they have a museum, they have put on cultural events. He's always worked in the culture ministries. And in message between Bannon and Epstein, Bannon describes Jacques Lang as a close advisor to Macron. When Epstein goes over to France or goes over to this ceremony at the pyramids, that same day or the day before, he talks about meeting with ministers. The Minister of Culture was there at the time. This is all when Macron is president. There's even this one text which is really, like you were saying, Brace, everyone sort of denies it, right? Until they can't deny it anymore. He says that basically, I can't talk right now. I'm at the Elysee. I'll be available in 45 minutes. The Elysee is the presidential palace. Macron is president. They won't answer any questions about it. Not publicly. There was one news organization called Valeur Actuelle, which is kind of like a fascist magazine here, and they talked to some people off the record at the Elysee who said that they checked the records and there's no records. But they won't respond to questions about, is there a record of Epstein being at meeting with Macron or meeting with anybody at the presidential palace?
Well, Epstein is pictured in sort of a rare dressed up Epstein costume, I guess you could say, with Jacques Lang at the Louvre, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's the ceremony that was mentioned, the 30th anniversary. That's not denied. I mean, it's impossible to deny it.
Yeah.
Jacques Lang, a couple of years ago, he said, oh yeah, I knew Epstein through Woody Allen. We would go to dinners together, but we didn't know each other very well. But there's literally thousands of emails with him, his daughter, Caroline Lang, and they would constantly, whenever Epstein was in Paris, he'd ask, oh, is your father available? They went to a Tintin exhibition together.
God,
apparently.
Man. I guess Tintin's technically Belgian.
Tintin's great, so I get it. And he said they tried to set up dinners between Jacques Lang and Bannon, Epstein says that Jack Lang is a great friend.
Mm-hmm.
He presented Lang as the counselor to Macron. He said he's super intelligent, passionate, but less like Chomsky. He knows his facts.
Well, speaking of facts, there's one kind of last question I wanted to ask you, Marlon. In the messages between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein, there is a mention of Macron's gay lover, the soldier. Now, I am not a Macronologist such as yourself. Obviously, there have been many rumors about Macron being gay over the years. I haven't really looked into them because I'm like, no, he is with his ancient wife. There, I know that you don't live here anymore, but there are some great controversies surrounding her and some of our most beautiful public commentators that are occurring right now. That are maybe she was even involved in the Charlie Kirk killing in some way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what Candace Owens, she's like a political scientist that's kind of gained prominence here in recent years. This is what she's been alleging. I haven't looked into it. But is there a rumor that Macron was stooping a male soldier?
There's always been this rumor. I remember a friend of my great aunt rather, who lives in Paris, told me this rumor first like 8 to 9 years ago, because apparently back then the Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, he used to live on the street. Because I asked, like, how do you know this? She was like, oh yeah, I heard it from Edouard Philippe, the Prime Minister. But I don't know. She's like this reactionary Catholic type lady.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, the exchange you're talking about, I mean, that's always been a rumor. There's one journalist I know who, I haven't looked into it myself, who apparently claims that he does not believe the rumor, but that's based on just his opinion, after having looked into it. But the exchange that you're talking about, Bannon says, along with some other tidbits, I was shown a photo of Macron's boyfriend. Ah, hypocrisy. Is that true? The soldier. And then Epstein goes, it gives new meaning to no worries, I have your back. Or remember, the French stand behind you. Yuck. So I don't know if he's implying that he saw some I don't know exactly what photo he saw.
Yeah, exactly.
With him. It's funny you mentioned Candace Owens because her whole theory about Macron is based on this French guy, Xavier Poussard, becoming Brigitte. And when these first emails came out in November, I posted some stuff on Twitter, some excerpts like that one, and I get this message from Xavier Poussard.
Oh, you're so lucky.
And we talk on the phone for like 45 minutes, and he is convinced that this is actually a play by Trump, because he's like going to trick the Democrats into revealing everything by releasing all these files.
Oh, that's just the sort of the bog standard like conservative line on this. Like, oh, Epstein, like this is Trump's trap. Like he got you to demand the release of the files, and now it's all crumbling down for you.
Definitely, but he has this really interesting because he wrote this book, Becoming Brigitte, which has some stuff of questionable veracity in it. Mm-hmm. But there's also a lot of really interesting details about like Macron and Brigitte's relationship. He clearly did a lot of research. He used to be editor of this magazine called Faits et Documents, which
Facts
is
and Documents.
Facts and Documents, which, again, back when all this, like when Epstein was arrested and Brunel was in prison, they put out some interesting issues. But they're like full of disinformation. They were behind this whole idea that Jean-Luc Brunel was called Jean-Luc Benchamoul, which isn't true. That's based on like some old dictionary of name changes, which doesn't correspond to his name. But they're super interesting because they traditionally have connections to the defense intelligence agencies, Faits et Documents. That's like sort of the conventional wisdom in Parisian journalistic circles. Faits et Documents get their information from defense intelligence, and they're sort of like a dumping ground of disinfo. So I talked with one person, another journalist, whose theory was that Macron himself had leaked this whole story, because there is a lot of weird stuff in Brigitte and Macron's early relationship beyond just like the pedophilia of it all. Like Brigitte Macron was the reason why Emmanuel Macron had a political career. She had connections to her family, has connections to Nicolas Sarkozy. She introduced him to all these circles and networks of power in the country and got him to where he is. So I've always thought that maybe that's. I don't know what Candace thinks of it. I'd love to talk with her about that, but it may just be a whole big disinfo op.
Yeah, I mean, F&D is a really strange institution to begin with. I mean, like I hadn't heard that about the Defense Intelligence Connections, but I spent a long time looking into them. And the guy who originally started as a bookstore, it's like a far right bookstore, had this huge collection of ephemera of the French far right and the European far right in general. But he was so proud of it that even he would actually lend out parts of his collection to anti-fascist researchers, just because he was sort of so thrilled to have this collection in the first place. And he was kind of looked down upon for doing that by much of the European far right, because it comes out of the the French New Right of the 1960s and Grec and all that kind of stuff. And it's just so funny how that stuff, like this 1960s New Right French stuff, ends with Candace Owens as this hugely popular far right commentator in the US, kind of basically just doing a book report on Xavier Poussard's book that he wrote about it. Because I watched all of her Becoming Brigitte and all of her sort of attendant shows about it. And then, I was looking at a lot of Xavier Poussard's stuff and some of the stuff that the Yellow Vests were putting out. I was like, oh, this is just where Candace Owens got all of it. And so sometimes she would talk about something that I was like, did she know what this is? Like, she's talking about something from French history or something from like French political life. And I'm like, she's saying this, but she's not saying this as somebody who might be familiar with any of the context. It's like sort of reading off of something. I'm like, oh, it's just because, she probably had this book translated or like run through an AI translator or something. And it's kind of just like going through it point by point. But she had Xavier Poussard on the show a few times. So there you go. Marlon, we gotta wrap up here, but what else is going on in France?
Well, right now, there are these criminal investigations. Macron has said that the Epstein affair is an American affair, and he doesn't think that there should be any further investigation beyond what the justice system is doing. There are some people in LFI, La France Insoumise, which is Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party in the National Assembly, who are trying to get a parliamentary commission into it, which would have, complete power to subpoena anyone except the president, but they would be able to subpoena people from his office and get those records to see whether Epstein was at the presidential palace or not. And so they want this investigation, but currently they do not have the votes for it. They said basically not everyone in the National Assembly wants an investigation. There's been claims that Yael Braun-Pivet, who's the president of the French National Assembly, like the Speaker of the House, she used to work for this law firm, Darrois, which one of their lawyers represented Brunel, so people are making hay of those connections. But we'll see if they get enough votes. There would be a parliamentary inquiry, though it looks like right now they don't have the votes.
It's weird. I feel like Macron, every 6 months I read that Macron has completely lost his majority, that he's not going to be prime minister anymore. But he's been prime minister for now as far as I can remember. And I see in my future, sort of my foresight, I feel like he's going to be prime minister of France for fucking ever.
Well, he's president, actually. There have been there have been 5 or 6 prime ministers.
President. Yeah. You're right. I always mix those up. Yeah, I know that there has been a big change in prime ministers, but it's just Jesus Christ, man. But we love him, right? I mean, that's the thing, is we love Emmanuel Macron. And the fact is, he kind of can't make a big deal out of the Epstein stuff. Not that he wants to, but he kind of can't, because it would imply some things about him and his wife, his ancient wife.
Yes, who they met when she was 14, I believe. He always claims 15, but
when he was 14.
When he was 14, and she was 35.
Yes, but she doesn't look a day over 250 now. I mean, Jesus. Not to comment on a woman's looks, but boy, she is a. You think that they? No, I'll save that thought. No, but I'll ask you. They don't. Do you think that they still make love?
He does seem to love her. Whenever they interact.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen videos of them. He kind of it's kind of creepy. He acts like a child around her a lot. There's that whole mother-son thing. But which, you often see in relationships between men and women. But
this one, I guess it's just less it's less glaring when it's not there isn't such an age difference as to where she could very easily be his mother.
She could be. Yeah.
That slap video.
And
Anyways.
her husband is dead.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Her first husband.
Marlon, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
Just follow me on Twitter, Marlon Ettinger. I'll
There we
put out
go.
any investigations. Working on a couple right now.
Bravo. Is bravo a French word?
I don't know if they say that.
I think they do say bravo.
Bravo.
Can't you hear it? Bravo. Well, bravo to Marlon. And thank you. It's fun to speak a little bit French like that. Marlon, you know?
Yeah, you get different sounds. You get some guttural.
Yeah.
Marlon.
Marlon.
Macron.
When I was in France, it was really difficult for me to say any words. I would try to, like, every time I would try to order something, ladies and gentlemen, you saw a man become a mouse because I would be like, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say whatever their fucking word for coffee is.
They like it if you try.
They do not like it if you try.
I think they do. I think they like it if you try better than if you just don't try at all. They think you're stupid.
This is what I like to do in foreign countries. Raise my voice as loud as possible. And I speak English. Sometimes I even punctuate not just the different words, but syllables by clapping in people's faces. So I say, Americano, please.
I'm with her.
Yes. And I go and I clap these things in these people's faces. Do you have a vegan option? I'm not vegan, but I am lactose intolerant. And if I eat this, I will feel bad. And they just look at me at the blank face, but they know what I'm saying.
I didn't like ordering an Americano. It made me feel it's like too on the nose. But I just want a regular coffee, but they don't do that.
Well, can I get a regular fucking black coffee, Jacques?
Let me get a
You know what I'm
coffee-flavored
saying?
coffee.
Yeah, can I just get a coffee-flavored coffee? This is the real red pill about coffee, ladies and gentlemen. You go to these countries, like, oh, they're great coffee drinkers. They love their coffee. Ooh, the French. Ooh, the fucking, Colombia. I've never been to Colombia, so actually I'm talking out of my ass on that. But the Italians, they love their coffee. The red pill is that all around the world, almost everybody's drinking instant coffee, except if you live in a American city where you're drinking, for some reason, a $6 third wave drip pour over coffee.
Well, they're drinking espresso and espresso-based beverages.
I know, but how about a damn cup of coffee? That's the thing. In the morning, what I want is I want a cup of coffee because I want to sit there and drink it. Espresso is over so quick.
Yeah. I want a cup of Good Morning America.
And this Turkish coffee, Greek coffee. Don't get me started. I love it. But I love it when it's sweet because it's like you're drinking. It's like if they made mud into a dessert. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you to Marlon for joining us. And, my name is Bryce.
I'm producer Young Chomsky.
I'm Liz, and this has been TrueAnon. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.